Hello and welcome to this lunchtime lecture on religions and the Sustainable Development Goals. Why might religious actors be relevant to sustainable development? Let me give you an example. Here is Professor Christian Happy as recently portrayed by the Financial Times. Happy is a leading African virologist, trained at Harvard and working at a Nigerian private university. Here, he developed a rapid test for Lassa fever and was at the forefront of containing Ebola when it came to Lagos. Just months before the coronavirus hit, Happy started to roll out a toolkit of tests and alert mechanisms for an early detection system of pandemics. And when COVID-19 arrived in Nigeria, he confirmed the first case and sequenced the virus within 72 hours. Happy is eager to share African experience with the world and is campaigning for a more equitable system in global virus research and vaccine distribution. What the Financial Times mentions only in passing is that the university that has enabled him to do this research is owned and run by one of the largest Nigerian Pentecostal megachurches, the Redeemed Christian Church of God. Led by the mathematician Enoch Adeboye, this church preaches the so-called prosperity gospel, which proclaims that Christians will live healthy and prosperous lives as long as they place their faith in God and regularly give to the church. This has made the church extraordinarily wealthy and allowed it to build strong networks in business and politics. It has built the largest worship hall of the planet, housing up to 300,000 people, and it claims 20,000 branches in Nigeria and has a vivid presence in the diaspora, which regularly earns political attention. In Nigeria, the church not only runs a university but also a polytechnical college, several schools, hospitals, an HIV/AIDS prevention program, and local food distribution centers. Is this church then an asset to the development of Nigeria? According to a PhD student of mine who researches this very question, the answer is ambiguous. The projects of the church serve clients regardless of their faith, but their main purpose is to advance the gospel and the political aspirations of the church. During the coronavirus pandemic, the church echoed the government's public health messages, but also promised that those walking with God would not be touched by the virus. Claims of healing and medical care go hand in hand, and the church's university provides an excellent STEM education to those who will submit to its biblicist ethics. Nonetheless, religious actors like the Redeemed Christian Church of God showcase the enormous energy and potential faith-based communities hold for development in many countries. They can be found all around the world and in all religions. They are trusted by their constituents, whose collective aspirations they embody, and whose needs they know and seek to meet. So what would it take to join up this potential and local experience with global development efforts? This question seems of particular importance to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs for short. The SDGs are the United Nations Global Development Framework adopted in 2015 by its 193 member states. The SDGs comprise 17 goals that extend to all areas of life, each defining 8 to 10 development targets to be achieved by 2030. For the first time, the SDGs also frame development as a globally universal task and therefore include goals of direct relevance to wealthier countries, such as responsible consumption and production, Goal 12. The language of sustainability is key. It assumes that success and longevity in development can only be achieved if efforts correspond with local value systems, aspirations, and visions of progress. And therefore, in setting the goals, the UN undertook what it calls the greatest civil society consultation ever held. This included an online survey in which more than 7 million people participated and multiple regional and global conferences with NGOs and other civil society stakeholders. To what extent then have religious actors been involved in setting the goals and in the early implementation of the SDG framework? I set out to explore this question together with Emma Tommelin, Professor of Religion and Public Life at the University of Leeds. Given our own research backgrounds, we decided to take a closer look at Ethiopia, India, and the UK. Thanks to funding by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, we were able to conduct interviews and run workshops in all 3 countries, which brought together academics, faith-based organizations, and religious representatives. One of the outputs of this first study of religious engagements with the SDG was a policy paper launched in 2019 at the Houses of Parliament with the Right Honourable Stephen Timms. Unfortunately, our main findings mark a sobering contrast to the SDGs' language of local mobilization, ownership, and sustainability. Even though we had managed to gather all the major faith-based organizations in each country, it was clear that the SDG process of setting the goals had reached very few of them and included almost none. Outside of the UK, knowledge about the SDGs was extraordinarily low, and many of our participants had never even heard of them before. Few of our interlocutors expected them to make a programmatic difference to their day-to-day activities, which were instead governed by local needs, the orientation of their organization, and the availability of funds. Yet, almost all nonetheless engaged with enthusiasm in the discussion of the SDGs because they saw their potential as a global advocacy framework, which could not only further international collaboration, but also enable them to hold their national governments to account. To date, however, the SDG implementation framework is not set up to deliver this kind of empowerment. The UN process relies primarily on national governments to set local targets, measure baselines, and report on subsequent achievements. This is vulnerable to political capture and civil society disempowerment. In none of the 3 countries we studied had faith-based organizations and religious actors been consulted in the implementation process, despite the considerable charitable monopoly they hold. Our India workshop was overshadowed by how the Hindu nationalist government has alienated certain religious groups, and workshop participants looked to the SDGs as a way to make this differential treatment visible. The Ethiopian government, in turn, has streamlined the SDGs into its own development plan that is narrowly focused on economic growth and almost entirely excludes humanitarian issues. Here, faith actors felt they were being talked down to by the government and were looking for ways to join up their perceptions and expertise with the country's development ambitions. The UK, in turn, has lacked a coherent SDG implementation strategy from the start, which has foreclosed the forging of strong partnerships with civil society. Calls for a ministerial SDG portfolio have been rebuffed so far, including a letter by 32 faith communities to PM Theresa May asking the government to work with them in the implementation of the SDGs. This only earned a tepid response from the Department of International Development. In short, faith actors in all 3 countries saw the potential of the SDG process for enabling a broader and critical engagement with development, but felt largely sidelined by the reporting and implementation framework. This aspiration by our interlocutors also shows that faith-based organizations stand first and foremost for social and political constituents rather than particular religious positions. This isn't always appreciated in the academic discussion of religion and development, which tends to focus on certain problem areas like gender equality, sexual ethics, or religious exclusivism. Our workshop participants were of course aware of these issues, but they saw themselves as facilitators and translators between the global development circuit and community values. This is also why they prefer to be addressed as development professionals rather than as religious actors. They fully subscribe to the global standards of impartiality, evidence-based practices, and accountability, and they act as brokers of these standards toward their own religious communities. That said, participants also noted that the language of the SDGs offered too little in this regard. Goals and targets are set up mostly around quantitative development indicators without offering much room for reflection on the values and ideals of progress underpinning them and how they might differ in local contexts. Let me end with one more look at the Redeemed Christian Church of God. Recently, the Church launched an ambitious program called Christian Social Responsibility, which seeks to collect and streamline its various development efforts. Its goal-centered approach and visual optics clearly mirror the SDG framework, and yet the SDGs are never mentioned. This is symbolic of the hiatus we also found. Faith communities and development actors work in a similar terrain, and yet they largely remain in parallel. If the SDGs motto to deliver a locally sustainable approach to development is to become reality, their mode of implementation must be changed. Direct engagement with faith actors may be a key factor here and is indeed of much interest to them, as our study has shown. Thank you for your attention.